opportunity. And thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. Now, I'm just going to share my screen so that now this is more to keep me on track than anything else. So I was asked to come in today and to talk about my approach to practice-based research, and really mine is about privileging humanity, or the humans, as part of this. And I really want to cover a few discrete topics tonight, and then leave it open for some reflection afterwards. So if we're going to consider that we're going to privilege the human in research, at least from my perspective, there's going to be a few things that I've got to cover. So first of all, an introduction to my context. I'll spend a little bit of time on life worlds, reality, and change, the methodology of friendship, ecologies of practice, and if time permits, there will also be polar bears and obscure sorrows included in this as well. So to start off with, I'm a PhD candidate with the University of Tasmania, as well as my position with the University of Southern Queensland. And my interest is in open education. And mostly what I'm interested in is how we actually advocate for and then create the environments that give rise to change. Now, when I reflect on my own considerations of change, I always say to colleagues that there are two things that I dislike intensely, and those two things are change and the way things are. And so as a result, I tend to look at how we actually motivate people towards change by considering, well, it takes an awful lot to motivate me to change practice. So when we approach this, one of the ways I find is to start with the human beings, start with the people themselves. And this comes from a wonderful book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and is one of my guiding words in this area, which is sonder. And it really is that realization that everybody that you meet, everyone that you pass by, has got a rich, fulsome inner world. And realistically, the chances of you being a massive part of that world are actually quite slim. In everybody else's lives, you play the part of the extra. And that can be a range of different things, such as he says here, sipping coffee in the background, a blur of traffic on the highway, or as a light at a window at dusk. So if we acknowledge the fact that there are these rich inner lives, how do we actually get to the point where we tease those out? And how do we actually start to understand what influences their practice? Well, coming at this as a pragmatist, that's my paradigm as a researcher. I very firmly believe that there is no capital T truth. Simply doesn't exist. However, what we do have is we have small shards of small t truth, which are interpreted by the individual. And the best that we can possibly hope for is to get a little shard of that truth. So going on from there, I use, behind everything that I do, a framework that comes from life worlds and also from ecologies. Now, what this states is every single person, irrespective of where they grew up, how they grew up, you could get a lot of commonalities, but what actually happens is a person's construction of reality, their truth, is influenced by a myriad of outside forces that they internalize, and then they use that to create their reality. The ecologies was Bronfenbrenner's way of formalizing this into various stages. And so if we are going to encourage people to change practice or to adopt new ideas, we actually need to know how they have constructed their life world. What is it that will appeal to them? What are the barriers to their practice or to their understanding or their attitude towards the kind of ideas that you're bringing forward? Also, I see research as a type of advocacy, and this dovetails with what is called the methodology of friendship. In this, the researcher, and again, this is the pragmatist in me, the researcher basically says there is no possible way that I can remain completely objective as a part of this research. I am a human being. I bring with it my own life world. I bring with it my own experiences, and that is a lens through which, irrespective of whatever claim I might make of objectivity, there is a level of subjectivity that will come through. The methodology of friendship actually embraces this, and it says, I'm a part of the community. I actually want to be a part of this, and I want to advocate for the types of ideas that are being put forward in this research. I actually want to make the community a better place to be. And so this methodology of friendship is a way of acknowledging where you're coming from, where you're situated within a community, and then on top of that, being able to use research as a method of advocating for change. Now, I mentioned before, and I'm going to come back to this, actually. I promised polar bears. We're going to come back to polar bears. But really, when we look at what we're trying to construct in practice-based research, is a static model or representation of very dynamic reality. It's impossible. We will never capture all of the things that go into this. However, what I use within my own research into open educational practice and experience in Australian higher education is this model which goes from microsystem through to macrosystem. And to explain it a little bit further, you start off with a microsystem, and this is what you have as an individual. It's really about how you relate to the world and how your experiences within the world have actually shaped you as an individual. Now, the thing is, we have different microsystems. If you think about it, is the person that you are at work and the way that you relate to your colleagues exactly the same as the person you are when you are with your friends or a close-knit circle, and your communication style, the way in which you evidence your values, are they different? Is the person who you are at home slightly different? I would argue that for most people the answer is yes. You are slightly different people in those environments. Now, the interesting stuff, of course, happens when you get to the meso system, which is where some of these actually start to overlap. And in open education, we get that happening really, it's one of those exciting things that I found out through my research, is that a lot of people are personally motivated, are individually motivated through ideas such as their ideology, sense of altruism, their idea about what the role of teaching and learning in higher education is. And this comes from that initial circle, that microsystem, and then that is the person who they are and their core beliefs and their values. And then you have them as teacher, educator, higher education staff member, and those two have actually overlapped. And where they overlap, the really interesting stuff begins to happen. The exosystems are things that have a direct influence over an individual, and often you don't have a lot of choice about this. Things like institutional policy, a new graduate outcomes statement, professional accrediting bodies and their role in, let's just leave it at accrediting courses at the university. All of these are examples of things that basically influence you, that you don't have a lot of control over, but they will shape the way in which you practice whatever field or discipline you're in. At the highest level, we have macro systems. These are things that are hard-coded into the society in which you live or culture. And these are things that if you want to change these, you're looking at intergenerational work. They're the really big ticket items. And so when you start to look at how an individual works within their ecology, my work is purely about open education and how people enact that and what it leads them to do. As I said, the really big one that came out of this was the practitioner values and what that actually leads people to do. There's a really fantastic core that comes out of this, where you get a level of pushback on policy, on the way in which the practitioner goes about their day-to-day teaching or the support of open education, because they find a dissonance between their values and the organisation. And in most cases, when I spoke to people, their values won out. And they decided that it was perfectly acceptable to ignore institutional reality and institutional policy if it meant they were staying true to their values. So these are the sorts of things that underpin the research that I take on. And then the outcomes of all of this is really about, well, what do we do? So what? We now know this about people, and we now know that within a particular environment, this is how people tend to behave. These are the types of influences, barriers, and enablers that they are set. Well, remember when I said about advocacy beforehand? This is a way then of us being able to harness these findings and be able to look at how we might then create an environment that values a flourishing open educational practice. Now, I did say about the polar bears, and I'm going to leave you with this idea, okay, getting into other people's heads. And this was one of the first things, one of the first poems that really kind of did my head in a bit, because I started to look at everything a little bit differently. There is an English poet by the name of Les Barker. I've got a link to him performing the poem in the bottom. But I will give you the first stanza as just a last taster before we move on to the second speaker. And it starts like this. On a cold, rainy night in a Liverpool quayside, in the years before the Great War, the world was in shock at the loss of Titanic. So proud had they been in days before. Relatives gathered for news of their loved ones to read through the list of the dead. When into the throng came a sad-eyed old polar bear, and to the clerk at the counter he said, "Have you got any news of the iceberg? My family were on it, you see. Have you got any news of the iceberg? They mean the whole world to me." And so what I would encourage you to do within your own practice and within your own research is look for the things that mean the whole world to other people. You might be quite surprised. I'll pass back to you, Emily.
Thank you, Adrian. So next up, we have Rebecca Muir, and Rebecca has over 10 years experience in public and academic libraries and is a doctoral candidate at Charles Sturt University. Rebecca's current research focuses on growing practitioners as researchers, evidence-informed decision-making and planning, and invisible disabilities in library services, design and training. Over to you, Beck.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to be here today as well. Adrian, that was absolutely wonderful, and I think the iceberg will be something that I'll try to take in mind more often as well when I'm conducting research. So I'll just open up my screen. There we go. So firstly, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we live, work and gather today, and to their elders past, present and emerging. So hello everyone, as we've just found out, my name is Beck Muir. I'm a practitioner researcher in the Australian Library and Information Science sector, and I focus on practitioner researchers, research skill development, qualitative research, mixed methods, disability and accessibility, inclusion and hiring practices across our sector. Yes, I do bounce between a lot of topics. So tonight I want to have a bit of a chat about the values of research skill development for LIS broadly and for us as practitioners. So just a heads up on my terminology, I will be using practitioner researcher and practitioner research skills pretty interchangeably. So let's set the scene. Surprising approximately no one, research within LIS organisations has been described as uncoordinated and overly reliant on surveys and questionnaires. Shock. This directly results in data that lacks nuance, detail and depth. We do have problems with evidence-based decision-making across the industry, which I see as partly tied to our rigid dogma about appropriate research methods to use. We struggle to understand what evidence is, we struggle to understand what good data is, and we don't necessarily know how to link the two. So this is pretty concerning in an industry whose entire jam is meant to be we understand information and which receives funding and support from organisations, government, council or universities. So moving from an all hail the survey approach in our industry to one that really hears and wants to understand patron feedback needs, experiences, usage, trends, all of this requires challenging our workplace culture to recognise the value of research skill development. Research skills help us as a profession to advocate for our worth and our sustainability, but herein lies the conundrum. While practitioners want to gain research skills, organisations are kind of a little bit more reluctant. So how can we advocate for the value of developing our skill sets as practitioners for our communities, for our organisations, and let's be honest, for ourselves? To me, our advocacy needs to start from a dual position of why should we learn about research and how can research skills help improve our data stories? Once we start from that space, we change our self-narrative around research to be one of worth, of proving the value that we provide to our community with hard evidence. To do this, though, we need to start linking practical questions with outcomes. We need to make that transition from what do we need to know to why are we collecting this data to how are we collecting this data with an outcome of what will we accomplish by changing this type of data? What would be the benefit? What might we discover? For practitioners to engage in research, we do need several things from our organisations. 3 of these key things, as Lisa found, is an understanding of the importance of research, help with writing up research, and the opportunity to apply and share our learnings. So as a practitioner researcher myself, I believe that if we're going to talk about the value of research skills and the value of research and data, we need to talk to our organisations about the value to them in each of these 3 areas. To do this, we really need to have a 2-layered conversation where we're recognising the benefits to us and our communities, but we're also talking to our organisations about the benefits to them. So I'll be showing this duality visually and verbally. So first up, developing a culture where practitioners understand research is extremely valuable for an organisation, and I say that as a manager. Developing practitioner research skills changes how we talk about our value, and it allows us to incorporate the feel-good community narratives that make our importance clearer to our organisational and funding bodies, whether they be government, business, public, or universities. As close researchers or people researching within our social group, we're ideally placed to provide answers that really yield a deeper, richer data than disconnected providers. Research-trained practitioners researching with people in their communities who they are passionate about and who they care about provides us with an edge to our research. For instance, our qualitative research provides us with an opportunity to find solutions that include the voices of our community and which articulate their needs, desires, and barriers when experiencing our surveys. Our quantitative research allows us to identify trends, barriers, favourite things that we can capitalise on and promote more broadly. Developing research skills also, of course, improves our ability to critically engage with the data that we use to make our decisions, which allows us to identify gaps that we can then address before they become issues. Related to this, developing staff skills in writing up research and constructing research questions is invaluable for any organisation that works with a funding or policy partner. For instance, I've been developing one of my hecking amazing librarians to analyse statistics, conduct thematic analysis of our LibChat transcripts, and to extract and explain findings. He's just written his very first Inside article, and I am seriously such a proud person right now of him, which has received interest from 4 other universities. Developing his skills in writing, constructing questions, and analysing data improves his industry profile but it also improves his ability to create cohesive work pieces and summaries, which improves his ability to then provide coherent feedback and advice to the library executive and management teams. At our university as well, I've noticed that simply changing how we're talking about data has started to change the narratives that our executive and our directors are hearing and seeing about us. They're now starting to recognise the value and the knowledge that we have of our academic community strictly through our interaction and engagement. We're seen as having positive stories that we can tell from our data. Lastly, empowering staff to develop research skills means that staff are more responsive to changes and more fluid in pivoting. We better understand the change and the challenge across our industries and the challenges within our community, but we're also able to better find alternative pathways when a solution just won't work for our particular cohort or context. So qualitative research skills, again, like thematic analysis, focus groups, means that not only can we identify solutions, but we can get buy-in from our community. We're better able to make decisions that actually reflect what our community wants and needs from us, which in turn improves our viability and raises our community profile. Trained staff are, of course, also better able to synthesize and find gaps in the literature, improving our ability in turn to help people to find information and critically engage with that, what we used to call the crap test. Needless to say, all of this improves our ability to make evidence-based decisions. Importantly, it also improves our ability to document why we've made those decisions, which as a manager, again, is increasingly important as we go into tighter and tighter financial and staffing situations. Of course, even with these benefits, organisations may be hesitant to develop a workplace research culture and research skills. Here we can talk about the value of partnerships and reputations in our data narratives and skill development. We can develop our research skills, our credentials, our ability to engage in our industry. So for instance, developing my practitioner research skills has led me to be invited last year to tutor on qualitative research at the Australian Evidence-Based Practice Librarians Institute. I've now been invited for a second year to tutor as part of this institute. This is the first time any member of my library has been invited to tutor, let alone twice, and now means that my library, my organisation, is starting to be seen in relation to having skills. Of course, groups, partnerships and practitioners can also help us to keep our skills up, which is vital when it comes to research because things do change. This reduces the organisational cost in ongoing development and creates a community of practice where we can learn from each other around more complicated topics, like how do we construct a research question? What on earth is an ethics application? What's high risk? All of these different things that we inevitably have questions about. But let's tie this all up and go back to the beginning. If we're to tell our communities, whether academic, special or public, that their opinions are important to us, we need to actually make sure that we're gathering the data that we need to hear those opinions, and we need to then make decisions based on that data. We need to be able to articulate how we've heard that data and how our approach to collecting that data is most suitable for what we need. Developing practitioner research skills positively impacts on the stories we can tell, the decisions we make, and our sustainability as an industry. For staff, for practitioners like myself, like all of us, developing research skills also means that we can improve our ability to be heard, to inform our practice and our voices with data. Also, these help us positively grow ourselves, and they highlight our value as practitioners, as employees, as researchers in this industry that we all work within. These skills can be really helpful to help us better advocate for our role in the community and our value in the community. And they allow us to ensure that our community voices are incorporated into who we are as a library and information service. So developing research skills as a practitioner really just makes sense. But if we're to start changing our workplace cultures, move away from hail the survey, and provide ourselves with opportunities to gain these skills, we need to understand the value of them, not only to our community, not only to our organisation, but to us. Who knows what we'll discover?
Thank you so much, Beck.
Thank you, everyone.
And finally, we have Rowena McGregor. And Rowena was recently a liaison librarian at the University of Southern Queensland. She's been a health librarian for 5 years at UniSQ and previously worked at QUT and Bond University libraries. And her interest in research and evidence-based practice was piqued when she was awarded a research scholarship as an undergraduate student. And most recently, Rowena has used research to co-develop and evaluate the online study support program at UniSQ. Over to you, Rowena.
Thanks, Emilia. I'll just share my screen and then I'll put the PowerPoint up. Let's see how successful I am. Let's see, and then let's get this going. Emilia, could you just confirm that you can see the PowerPoint?
Yes, all good.
Yay. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So tonight, so I'm Rowena McGregor. As Emilia said, I'm the health librarian, just transitioning to actually a learning advisor position at University of Southern Queensland. And I'm really very grateful to live and work on the country of the Yagara people. And tonight I'm going to be talking about reflective practice. And before I begin, this is something that's dear to my heart, and I've chosen an image which I'm really fond of. The snail, not only is it possibly looking at itself and reflecting, I think the other pertinent parts of this image are the shape of the snail's shell and how they grow from, the small central point and then outwards, constantly looking back, in my mind, on the same perhaps circumstances and so on, and growing and learning. The other thing I like is that you can see highlighted there the snail's its cardiovascular system, for want of a better word, circulatory system, the little veins and so on, shown by the way the sun's going through. And I think reflective practice is also capable of highlighting and showing things that might otherwise not be noticed or go unseen. A little bit about UniSQ, just to sort of contextualise it. So we are a regional university. This is a photo of the Toowoomba campus, and you can see lots of open countryside in the background. Some of our campuses, sure, are in more urban areas, but most of them have a bit of a rural outlook. We often talk about our different student cohorts and how that impacts our work, but we might also acknowledge that our staff have different experiences and opportunities in development and so on. Not inferior, just different than the ones I've seen available in my work in the larger urban universities. And I'll touch on that a little bit as I go. So firstly, I'm going to talk about reflective practice and a project I tried to get up with mixed success around reflective practice. So my preferred definition is that of Miller. So reflective practice being a purposeful and structured examination and analysis of an event. So this examination and analysis, it often uses a specific, sometimes a purpose-built reflective tool. So reflective practice is purposeful as it aims to inform and perhaps change practice and/or policy and inform decision-making to improve outcomes within the context that that original event occurred or unfolded. Okay, so is reflective practice useful in libraries? You betcha. I undertook a little literature review at the beginning of the year, mainly because I've found reflective practice to be so useful myself, and I was just wondering if there might be broader appeal. And I found many different instances, including 4 recent academic library case studies pertinent to my environment. So firstly, at UniSQ, the entire library and all staff to one point, were required to nominate a form of reflection as part of their applications for professional development. So a conference or a talk with staff or something that would help them kind of cement the learning, or, get the learning into you. I don't know. Sorry, that was not very articulate. But anyway, I'll plow on. I've also found 2 US-based teaching examples. So one group of teachers reported by Wagner et al. In 2021, they were working together to improve the collection of feedback. So asking better feedback questions that they could actually take action on feedback and respond to it. Then Reagan et al. In 2020 reported on a teaching team. They were working together. They all wanted to become more learner focused. So they collated specific kinds of reflection to forward that process. Finally, reflections also used within library education in the US. So I've got one example, that's SING 2020. Embedded within is a course on cultural competency, and the students reflect on the different experiences that they had that created their own understandings of culture and the way they respond to other cultures and the wider world. So I had lots of evidence that reflective practice was great in a university. And from that, I took that and decided to work with my learning advisor colleague, Kate Derrington, to deliver some professional development at UniSQ Library. And so this is what we did and what happened. So we had 3 tiers to this in our plan. So firstly, we delivered an evidence-based practice newsletter. So we hijacked one of ALIA's monthly newsletters, and we attractively packaged in Sway a number of resources, quite diverse resources. So there was something for everybody in the library, videos and journal articles and books and chapters, all sorts of different things. Secondly, we liaised with different managers all through the library to kind of make sure that, to produce something that would work for everybody. And we then delivered a session, a professional development session online. And in that session, we talked about reflective practice and presented the what, so what, now what model developed by Bolton way back in 2009. And we used Mentimeter to allow the participants in that session to respond to different scenarios. So we had some scenarios, and then we asked the what, so what, now what, and everyone could type in their their thoughts into Mentimeter. The third part of the process was to be a journal article. So I created a bit of a skeleton for that, and I wanted or invited people who were interested to submit a vignette of their experience of reflective practice. It could have been using the what, so what, now what model, or a different method of reflection. So that was the aims and what we did, or we'll see. So using the reflective practice framework, what happened? We had really great engagement with the first 2 items. So the newsletter generated a number of emails. People liked it. It was pretty. That's great. And also, people engaged with different elements. They read the blog posts or the articles and so on, and they communicated with me, and we had little chats on email. We also had a number of people attending the session, and the engagement with the Mentimeter and the model was really great. It was very lively. It worked well. The feedback was also good as well. However, very few people asked to be involved in that research project, the journal article. And the people that did ask were people who had already, had a bit of a track record in publishing. So it didn't reach perhaps the people, the client services officers and so on at that different levels of the institution. Also, my general busyness in the last 6 or so months has prevented progress. So we've had a number of health courses added for next year, and there's been a lot of work to do, as usual. There's always something. So what? So what's the implications of that? Well, perhaps the value of reflective practice isn't as available to staff and to the library to the extent that I wanted. And also perhaps people have missed out on that opportunity of writing an article. So what could I do? If I wanted to revisit it, I could ask the stakeholders in different roles, is this something you would value, and how could it best be supported moving forward? So that's my reflections on what's happened so far. Thinking about takeaways. So a few lessons for me. Number one, reflexivity is key to this. The literature not only predicted the wonderful benefits of reflection, right there in black and white in every single one, there were the fail points of this particular research project that I wanted to undertake. That is the journal article. The fail points of doing the research and longer term engagement with reflective practice. The pertinent things to my particular project, as I can see, is lack of time. And not only lack of time, what I think now is that many positions in the library, they're not like mine in that their time is allocated. You know, they're on chat, then they're on the desk, and then they're answering the phone, and then they're out, you know, in the stacks and so on. Whereas my time is very free. I have to achieve certain things for sure as a liaison librarian. However, I can do that how and when I would like to. The second thing was a lack of committed leadership, and that's my leadership, no one else's. So if I'd really thought about it and read it in the articles, as I did, I didn't really pay enough attention. I could have set something up that allowed me to better support people if they wanted to progress to the journal article stage. And finally, perhaps, and I said, I imagine there could be a lack of confidence in reflective practice, like one session might not have been enough. And perhaps the benefits weren't clearly articulated or weren't really felt as something that would be useful to many people. And I wonder now what this might have looked like had I actually partnered with some of the people that I would have liked to work with from the beginning. So had I gone out and asked people, how does this land with you? Is that something that looks like an opportunity or not? And I think the reason I didn't do that, because I do know better, I think the reason I didn't do that is that I didn't want to hear the no. So I was keen, I was in love with the idea, I've gotten so much of it, I want to share it, but I didn't take that really key step to actually ask those really important questions. Okay, so on my slides, which Emilia has, if anyone's interested in receiving those, there's some links to some resources. So a recording of a conference paper that Lyndall Gunton and I presented, and that includes the Mentimeter exercise. So we produced that, we provided that to a conference, and that went down really well. So Menti in action. The blog post I wrote on reflective practice, and also that wonderful reflective practice evidence-based practice newsletter item. And then also, of course, some references, some key items that I used to develop the whole process from the beginning. Okay. So that's me, and I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rowena, and also Adrian and Rebecca for 3 very thought-provoking presentations there. Happy to open up to questions now. If you would either like to pop it in the chat, or if you are happy to unmute yourself and ask the question directly, more than happy to have the questions posed that way as well.
Becca and Adrian, I was actually wondering, so Rowena, a thread that I noticed across all 3 of them was that reflexivity and kind of the role of the researcher or practitioner as researcher in both practice and research. I was wondering if either of you have found that incorporating that reflection or reflexivity into your own work had encouraged or supported other library staff or anyone else in your workplaces to kind of come on board with research projects as well.
From my perspective, embedding in
Very
reflection.
quiet.
Oh, very quiet, sorry. My tech is just having a day. Definitely from my perspective, embedding in that reflection, both as I'm doing projects and after I finish projects or my day-to-day operations, even a lot of the times, I think it does change the culture of my workplace and how, like, my colleagues, my team kind of envision their own roles as well as being something that they need to critically think about. What am I doing? What is the benefit of this? What have I learned? What would I change? What can I grow? Everything like this. So my particular approach as a researcher is constructivist. And one of the things that I really love blending with constructivism is reflection on and reflection in action, that process of critical engagement as you're doing something and that critical engagement afterwards. And even though I don't use that language at work, it is something that I see people picking up just purely through having it shown and enacted towards them, that they pick it up and they do use it themselves as a conscious thing to change their own practice.